Hello, peoples of the internet. I'm Mo, and I'm here today with my December wrap-up. So, if you're wondering why I'm all bundled up, my house is freezing right now. Probably almost literally. Yeah, I'm just doing my best to stay warm. But back on topic, so far as what I read in December, I read 6 things. And I'm going to be talking about them in order of what I liked least to what I liked most. So the first book that I'm going to talk about is The Earl of Brass by Kara Jorgensen. This is a steampunk novel. It's the beginning of a series. So it follows this guy who's going to be an earl. He's not an earl yet. He's the earl's son, who in the beginning of the story is in an airship accident and ends up getting injured and loses a limb. And so this, obviously being a steampunk story, is going to be delving in a little bit to cybernetics, and it also gets to follow his sort of recovery and how he's learning to deal with that loss, and especially within society at that time. He's also an amateur archaeologist, so there's a part of the book where he goes off on a dig and you get to see those things happening. There were parts of this book that I really liked and parts of it that I was less keen on. Like, the first half of the book I thought was really good. There were parts during the second half where I just felt like the way that societal problems were talked about was felt overly simplified to me. But I did really like the main characters in this, and I gave it 3 stars. The next thing I'm going to talk about is a collection of poems, and it's The Star Treader and Other Poems by Clark Ashton Smith. This was written around the turn of the century, and Clark Ashton Smith was sort of part of the weird fiction movement at that time, and so this is a collection of poetry, a lot of which is dealing with space. So there are poems about stars and comets and things like that. Some of these poems I really liked, others I didn't really connect with so much. It's always really hard to give star ratings to a collection. I think I would say probably about half of these that I quite liked. His style is much more, it's an older style, more like the old romantics in a lot of ways, so far as the way that he does meter and rhyme scheme and those types of things. So if you like that and you like things about space, science fiction, this might be the sort of poetry that you would enjoy. Overall, I gave the collection 3 stars. The next thing on my list is 2001: A Space Odyssey by Arthur C. Clarke. Obviously, this is a big standard of the science fiction genre. I had never read any Clarke before. This was the first one of his that I picked up. I actually ended up listening to this on audio for most of it, and I really enjoyed it overall. There were certain things that I kind of already knew about the story because it is kind of this big, cultural, there was a movie, people know things about it. So I knew that there were monoliths, and I knew about Hal before going in. But Hal ended up being my favorite part, actually. I found the way that the author built tension during those sections with Hal, the computer, and the astronauts interacting was just really well done, and I really enjoyed the book overall. The next thing I want to talk about is Sunshine by Robin McKinley. This is actually, I don't know if I want to call it paranormal. Vampires figure in it heavily, and I am not normally into vampire books. I was really surprised, actually, that I read a vampire book and I gave it 4 stars, because I don't normally like that type of thing, especially the sort of thing that has been more popular recently, like with Twilight and those types of things. Not my deal, but this was just really well done. It's set in, I guess you would call it urban fantasy, so it's set in a sort of modern day world, but it's a world in which all of these different magical creatures exist. So there are vampires, and there are fairies, and there are demons, and whatever, and a lot of these different creatures have integrated with normal society, but the vampires have not, and vampires are not friendly creatures in this book. They're definitely quite frightening. But then they also have their own sorts of political things going on within the vampire world, so to speak. So this story follows a girl who's a baker, and she ends up at the beginning of the story getting kidnapped by vampires, and she discovers all of this vampire politics stuff that's going on, and she has to deal with that, while at the same time still dealing with real life, because she doesn't want to tell people all this stuff that's happened because she's afraid that they'll like lock her up or something, or take her away and, you know, try to do experiments on her or put her in counseling or whatnot because of the experiences that she's had. And so I really enjoyed this book. I felt like the characters were just really well done. They were all very real, very vivid characters, and they were all people. And I think that's what made the vampires in this work so much for me as well, is that none of the characters in this were stereotypes. They were all very much their own character, and I really enjoyed the different relationships that were involved and going on in here, and overall it was just a really fun read. The next one is The Man Whom the Trees Loved by Algernon Blackwood. Algernon Blackwood wrote back in the early 1900s, and he wrote sort of psychological, I don't know if I want to call it psychological horror, because it's not like other books that are considered psychological horror. Necessarily, this is a novella. It was very atmospheric, and so far as what I know about Algernon Blackwood's writing is what he likes to do, rather than creating this really scary monster or thing that the characters run into, he tries to take something that's normal and everyday and then turn it into something scary. So in this novella, it's trees. And I'm going to say that this is not going to be a book for everybody. There's not a lot that happens plot-wise. A lot of it is really just following the characters' thought processes and the way that they're perceiving things, and just interacting with the world, conversations that they're having. And I think that if you like that sort of atmospheric, psychological, like you're not sure if there's actually anything wrong, but you might be about to die type of horror, that you'll probably enjoy this. There are not very many characters. There's basically like 2 characters, or kind of 3, in this story, and so it's very... I don't really know how to talk about it because it doesn't follow a lot of those normal tropes. And I think, if I remember correctly, when I looked at the reviews on Goodreads, there were people who loved it and people who really didn't like it. And it seems to me like it would be one of those books. I personally really enjoyed it. I thought it was really cool. And I think that sense of what he did with the horror aspects being really based in the characters' perceptions and in their thought processes made it all the more creepy, because it was this sense of the characters can't go anywhere for help because they're not even sure of what they think is wrong, and no one would believe them if they said anything, so they're really on their own in the situation. So yeah, I also really loved the writing style. His prose is beautiful, and I'm definitely planning on picking up some more of his work this coming year. All right, and the last thing that I wanted to talk about, I've already talked about a little bit on my channel, and that is City by Clifford D. Simak. This is a science fiction novel, and it is essentially in a future where there are no longer humans on the earth. There are dogs telling these legends about humanity, and it's kind of a series of short stories, but they're connected, so it's also kind of a novel. If it sounds interesting to you, it did make my top books of the year for 2015, and I talked about it quite a bit more in that video, so I will link that down below if you want to go check it out. Otherwise, that is everything that I read in December. I've already read a few things this month here in January, which will be going on my January wrap-up. So yeah, let me know if you've read any of these, what you thought of them, or if any of them sound interesting to you, what your favorite read of December was. And I will be talking to you guys next time. Bye.